one of the reasons for that is that you're so confident in that stillness that there is no more movement of mind possible. Diamond-like Samadhi, where nothing moves. Which is one of the reasons why that if you start enjoying and benefiting from those states, if you don't make the resolution beforehand, how long are you going to stay in there? Once in, it's impossible to come out until the karmic forces, that's the best way you can call it, the amount of letting go and renunciation you had when you brought in to the jhanas, when that runs out, then you'll come out. In Sydney, so I like telling anecdotes. In Sydney, just some years ago, it wasn't myself, it wasn't even a Western monk, a monk from another, it was Theravada, started a meditation retreat, 9 days, usually half an hour meditation, followed by the first talk on a Friday night. He never gave a talk on a Friday night. He never went to bed. He never slept. He never ate. He sat there for 8 days without moving, without going to the toilet, without drinking, without eating. And when he came out, he apologized. He said, I was supposed to give you a talk, but I made the mistake that I entered one of these deep jhanas, and I never actually told myself when I was supposed to come out. So for 8 days, he was in there. And the people who saw this were actually really impressed. They said, you never gave us any talk through words, but just seeing that this is possible in today's world was a great inspiration. And to hear that you've done, how many years of silence, 6 months or something? 9 years of silent retreats. Now that's inspiring.
So I'm not going to ask Ajahn Brahm if he's ever entered the jhanic state, but I'll assume he has. And but
can I actually answer that? Because
please.
It was a frustration, and then making sure that people don't get the wrong message, and also saying something which is important about these jhanic states. And a few years ago, Shayla, I just frustrated and said, okay, I can understand the loophole. And I say to all those people who have any faith or confidence in me, and who've listened to my talks, read that book on mindfulness, bliss and beyond, and I say, Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhana. I can't do it. And then before people go to the door and say fraud, I say that Ajahn Brahm has to disappear. Yes. My sense of self, ego, someone who's attaining something, who's actually doing it, that is what I have to leave behind. And when you leave that sense of self behind, the doer, the controller, the whatever, then those jhanas happen.
I think this, people who've done mostly mindfulness in a secular way might often wonder what is attractive about withdrawing from the senses. But when we realize through our understanding of the way we perceive the world is that very often a deluded mind is when we see, when we hear, when we taste, we're constructing a sense of self again and again and again and again through the way we perceive ordinary things. And so to give the mind a rest from all of that, from all that conceiving of self, that drops away in the movement away from the sense doors. We're no longer needing to keep reconceiving ourselves from the five senses, and we're no longer engaged in discursive thought processes, which also keep constructing the self. And that provides such a profound experience of rest that is not a dull rest. It's actually energetic because we're not drained all the time with that exhausting pursuit of self-construction.
So then what would you say is the payoff of jhanic states? So you're describing a few benefits, like you're seeing the constructive nature of the mind, you're seeing it's also giving a sort of rest and energy to the mind. What's the actual goal of reaching jhana?
There's a quote from the Samyutta Nikaya that says, where the Buddha said, develop concentration. one who is concentrated understands things as they really are. That's the real payoff, is that when we are concentrated, the mind is stable. It's able to have a clear perception of things. If we're not concentrated and we're just seeing things at the superficial level of how things are, then we might we'll have some degree of insight, but we'll probably have insights into the way that we are distracted, the way that we are encountering the hindrances, the way that our personality insights. But to get below all of that, we have to have a still mind. We have to have a fit, strong mind to really have the kind of insights that can not just free us from one particular thought pattern or one particular hindrance, but actually cut through the patterns of conditioning. And I think concentration is a critical component of and support for liberating insight. Now, sure, there's a lot of other benefits, and often when people come to they come to a jhana retreat, often in the back of their minds is the desire to bliss out. The desire to experience these states of happiness that are beyond sensual pleasures. But I think that when you ask what the aim is, what the purpose is, what right samadhi depends upon is right view, which is the aim of liberation.
So right view is the payoff in some sense.
Right view enables right samadhi, and right samadhi strengthens the possibility for right view to bring it to liberation.
Mm-hmm.
They all work together. It's not really linear.
Yeah. So there's a support network there.
Yeah.
So Ajahn Brahm, could you tell us a little bit about the relationship between samadhi, jhana, and insight, and let's go to liberation as well.
Very good. To add something there from my own teacher, Ajahn Chah, who said we always meditate to let go, not to attain things. And I remember that so clearly. He repeated it often. You don't get into a jhana by trying to attain it. The more you let go, the more you renounce. That's part of the right view, which you sometimes have to start with. The more you let go and renounce, the easier it comes. So for many people, their jhanas become in spite of them, often unexpected, often just out of the blue. It happens. And the benefits of that is two things. First of all, to the data. You've been in a jhana. And this is what the Buddha was talking about. Number one, he described it as Sambodhi Sukha, the joy, the bliss of enlightenment, awakening. So when we had that panel about, what is awakening, enlightenment, you're actually experiencing the taste of freedom. It's not freedom yet, because once you have the data, the second part of the jhanas, which is very vital, is it suppresses the 5 hindrances which distort perception and cognition. So you start to see, when the Buddha said there's no self in here, that the body with its senses is suffering, then actually you see that. You come out afterwards knowing that this, most people would, at least it's pretty obvious that, this body is a pain. And people say, Ajahn Brahm, you should get a life. Go and listen to beautiful music. Go and see a sunset. See the birth of a child. A lot of these stuff, you realize, I'm gross, it's shit. Compared to the bliss of the deep meditations. So it puts this body in context. And number one, number two, you actually understand what this will is. The sankhara, the house builder. You've actually seen it only when it disappears. Things which are always here, you can't know. The ambient sound, the taste of saliva in your throat, is only when it vanishes. Can you understand what it truly is? The vanishing of stuff is the meaning of anicca. What was always there is suddenly taken away. And now this thing we call will is not belong to you at all. It disappears. And oh, what bliss to not have any will.
Now, sure, if we could just let go, you'd only need the instruction of those 2 words and then you'd be enlightened. But most of us need a little training in this. We need to develop the ability to let go. We need to convince ourselves that letting go is actually good. There's no loss in it. And so in the first step, just to enter jhana, as Ajahn has said, we have to let go of the hindrances and we have to withdraw our attention from our preoccupation with the sense world, with sense desire. And when we have experienced jhana and experienced the joy and the happiness that comes when we're not caught up in the realm of sensual desire, when we re-encounter pleasant sensual experiences, we will do so from a very different perspective. Because we will know that happiness cannot be found that way. Because we will have from its absence, as you said, we will know a higher happiness. We will know something else. And so by experiencing sustained states of absorption in which the hindrances are absent, and then we encounter a pleasant experience, it's still a pleasant experience. But the tendency for lust and sensual desire to arise in relationship to it is greatly diminished.
So I just want to underscore this letting go, because you both have nodded to that as crucial to the practice. And it's a letting go, and it may be counterintuitive for people who are first coming to these instructions, because you hear about jhana 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like levels, and there's this idea of absorption, and absorption feels like there's a movement towards something. So absorption comes through letting go. And then also, it seems what you're saying is that the insight comes through the absence of things, right? So this is interesting. The meditation instruction is to let go, and then the payoff is the insight through the absence of things. So I think this is very profound. I also wanted to ask then, like you just said, it's not as easy as those 2 words, letting go. So how does someone move their practice deeper? What's the sort of instructions that you give? And I'll hand that to both of you to answer that. Ajahn Brahm, do you want to start us off?
Okay, well, you can imagine this. I was going to fill this glass full of water. It's this thing which I've demonstrated many times. How do you keep a glass of water perfectly still? Holding it, even being mindful of it, will never keep this still. If it was an open glass, it would actually start moving even more. It's one of the reasons these states are usually called concentration. I much prefer stillness. And states of letting go, it's not you do the letting go, that letting go happens. You can't do letting go. You let go of doing, or basically the doer just disengages. Come on, let go. Let go. Let go. You can see that's coming from a sense of will. It's the person disappears. You're not there, and letting go is what happens when you do nothing. So the only way to keep this perfectly still is just stop grasping, stop holding, put it down, renounce, relinquish, stop. All these wonderful words which you've probably heard so many times, but are so difficult to do because you try to do it. Vanish. Don't be there. And letting go happens as an automatic process, in spite of you, not because of you.
One of the things that I appreciate about the jhana practices is to actually take a fairly systematic approach to training the mind to let go. So it's an increasing appreciation and love of letting go. many times I think in our conditioned world, we train ourselves to hold on or to accumulate or to gain in some way. And that training becomes one of realizing the alignment with truth that happens, or the alignment with how things are, or peace, when we are not contriving. But nevertheless, I feel as though there's a very strong role for intention in the practice. To have a very clear right intention and to have a very clear skill in right effort. And because jhana practice can really show when we're forcing, or when we're lazy, or when we're not meeting the object, or when we're meeting it through the lens of self-interest and wanting, it becomes a fabulous training vehicle for really working with right effort, so that it's very, very balanced and can meet the experience of a very simple meditative perception in a way that doesn't distort it, but allows for the deepening of mindfulness, the continuity of mindfulness, and the deepening of samadhi and insight. So I take these absorption states fairly systematically, more so I think than what I'm aware of that you do. And when somebody, although I agree that people can drop into these states, sometimes doing other practices or sometimes without even knowing what they are. When somebody in a retreat tells me this, I say sloppy. Sloppy. And I want to go systematically so that they develop the clarity of what the conditions were that allowed that release to happen, what the experience of the release was, what the state of mind was that the mind was absorbed in, and are able to re-experience that whenever they want, so that they know the path of entry and they know the experience of the exit. So I don't like students to go wiggling around through the absorptions until they have already gone through kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4 in a systematic way, and have developed some degree of mastery over all 4 of them. Then they can play with them as they wish.
Yes, I would say that's a very dangerous path. It's great we have a dialogue because in differences, sometimes I make up the differences when they're not there, just to emphasize a point. Even the right intention, the sammasankappa, some of these words need retranslating urgently, because it's not really intention. The sammasankappa is number 2 of the Eightfold Path. It's coming from renunciation, nekamasankappa, from metta, loving kindness, avayapada sankappa, and ahingsaka, non-sort of violence, so gentleness. And that is almost a non-effort. And it's the effort, especially in the English language, says there's somebody doing that. You're striving for something. Instead, I prefer, again, a metaphor which Ajahn Chah taught me, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous and stupid when I first heard it, but I always remembered it for some reason. And that was his monastery, Wat Pah Pong, was like a mango orchard. The mango trees had been planted by the Buddha himself, and those mango trees were full of ripe, juicy mangoes, but there was only one way to get those mangoes which were produced by the Buddha. And that was not to climb the tree, not to throw things up the tree, not to sort of shake the tree, not even to get a cherry picker, or a helicopter. There's only one way to get those mangoes, and that was to sit perfectly still underneath that mango tree and hold your hand out, and a mango will fall. Sounded stupid, but my goodness, Ajahn Chah was on the money. If you try and shake, nothing falls. But where I do agree with you there, the effort should be actually to say, stop. Stop trying to climb the tree. Stop trying to make it happen. And remember the causes, how these things actually happened, why that jhana occurred. And recreate the causes rather than try and recreate the effect. And now from those jhanas, Yeah. And it could be. So the effort is an effort to stop, to find out what you're trying to do, what you're trying to attain. Get the ego out of the way, because that's what the ego does. It does stuff. And tries to attain. Spiritual materialism. Be very careful of that. I've got the first jhana. How many of you got? I've got more than you've got. Da, 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 da. Unfortunately, that happens.
I think we need like a 3-hour conversation here, because there's some real cool territory to get into. This idea of dropping the will versus this idea of using intention in practice. I don't think they might be contradictory, but we need 3 hours to work that out. I wanted to ask, maybe Ajahn Brahma, I had a question. So we talk about jhanic states and the dropping away of these 5 senses disappearing, as you said. Then, and what this is the absence of these things then start, and then coming back into the world, you start to get insights about impermanence. So do you need to have jhana? Couldn't, just meditating on sound give you a similar insight into the impermanence of sound?
No. And the reason is the simile, which I'm sure you realize I was going to say, the best simile which I came up with was the difference, or a tadpole living in the water, born in the water, spending all its life in the water, and she studies water, she goes to university, she even studies Abhidhamma on the nature of water, because the lake is in a monastery. But how on earth can a tadpole understand what water is? It can't understand the nature of water no more than a fish can, because it's always there. But now imagine the little tadpole grows legs and arms. She does not know what's going on, but she becomes a frog. And the frog jumps out of the water. And when it jumps out of the water, that is weird. That is strange. Something which has always been there is now missing. Water. Now, little tadpole, she can understand, now a frog can understand what water is. How can you really understand this human body until it disappears? How can you understand the will when it's always been there for you? You may not push the buttons to exercise your will, but you can leave this hall whenever you want. It's there for you. What happens if you can't find that button at all? It's turned off, that there is no will. Now you can understand what will is, and how so many people are manipulated by governments, by friends, by advertising. The will is not yours. Not me, not mine, not a self. It doesn't belong to you. And that is one of the scariest things to realize, but also one of the most liberating ones.
So I love the frog tadpole analogy. So then my question that arises for me is, what about the realization of the oxygen of the 6th mental consciousness? How does that come about?
Asking me or you?
Yeah, for you, and then
okay. Well, what happens next is the second jhana is within the first jhana. It's almost like a special case of a first jhana. And the third jhana is inside the second jhana. You don't go out of the second jhana. It's just more things disappear. They stabilize and disappear. And then to the fourth jhana. And for the fourth jhana, imagine, I like changing words over. Instead of equanimity, contentment. So content, so still. And this is a peak of mindfulness. You don't have more mindfulness than this, ever. So you're fully awake, but so poised. Wherever there's stillness, things disappear. So you get the great vanishing of what we call the arupa attainments, the immaterial attainments. By little, your mental faculties, the 6th sense, vanishes and disappears and ceases. Experience the cessation of all that's felt and perceived.
So cessation. So Shaila, you want to say something on this particular topic?
Just briefly,
Yeah.
One of the most noticeable things that one experiences the mind, the jhana mind as having an absence of is the activity of the defilements. And there's such sustained states that it's not just a short period where the mind is not engaged in anything related to sensual desire, to aversion, towards conceit, towards selfing, towards whatever the defilements are. But they're extended periods of time. So the meditator really knows the wholesome mind. And there's the opportunity for that wholesome mind to, it's like the cells, it's not a physical experience, but it's like our entire being is resonating with the possibility of purity of mind. And I think the absence of the hindrances in those states has a profound effect that really lasts long after the absorption. So that's one more thing that is really let go.
Yeah.